My presentation is the big aha, and it's all about how to future-proof Kentucky. And I'm going to cut right to the chase and tell you the big aha. It's what I want you to take away from this presentation. And what the big aha is, it's an acronym, and it's how I want you to think about the future. And what it stands for is awareness, humility, and action. I'm going to walk you through each one of these three principles in my presentation. But before I do that, I know one of the most common questions I always get is, well, what do you do, Jack? What does a futurist do? And that's a great question, but rather than tell you what I do, I want to show you what I do. And I know that some of you have already seen this video, but that's okay. I'm going to show it to you again anyways. What I want you to do is I want you to count the number of times the people in the white shirt pass the ball. Whoever gets the correct answer, get a signed copy of my latest book. So does everyone understand what I'm asking? Okay, count the number of times people in the white shirt pass the ball. Here we go. Okay, that's it. How many people counted 15? Could I see a show of hands? Okay, so some of you. What about 16? More of you, 17? Okay, everyone who said 16, please stand up. Remain standing. 16 is, in fact, the correct answer. Now, unfortunately, I don't have books for all of you, but stay standing. I have a tie-breaking question, but now only the people who counted 16 can participate. But whomever I see raise their hand first with the correct answer to this follow-on question will get the book. So of the people standing, who could identify all three changes in that video? There were three quite distinct changes. What about two? Who saw two? Who saw the most obvious? Yes, sir. The gorilla. Congratulations. You win the book. If you could pass that back to him. Could I just see a show of hands how many other people saw the gorilla? Okay, so it looks like about 25% of you. But even those of you who saw the gorilla, there are a couple other things that you missed. Those of you who did not even see the gorilla, let me show you everything that you missed. And this is, in fact, the exact same video. So I told you I was going to show you what a futurist does. Look, I gave all of you an incentive to focus on a very specific task. Count the basketballs, you're going to win the book. My guess is in your day-to-day job, you're similarly incented to focus like a laser on whatever your specific professional responsibility is. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's your job. But as a futurist, I have the luxury of stepping back and looking at the big picture. And the first thing I like to tell my audience is there is, in fact, the equivalent of an 800-pound gorilla coming front and center into our lives, beating its chest, only it is in the form of new emerging technologies. And I'm going to help you become aware of these new emerging technologies. Because of these new emerging technologies, we know that certain jobs, certain industries are going to disappear in the not too distant future. It's kind of like the person in the black shirt just walking away. But because of all of this technological transformation, we also know that business models and customer behavior is going to change in some subtle ways. It's like the curtain changing color. It is difficult to see all of this transformation. But the first thing we all need to do if we want to future-proof Kentucky is just become aware of how fast the world is changing right before our very eyes that we're just not seeing. And let me just walk you through the last couple of months. You probably saw some of these things, but you didn't really think about what they mean to the future of Kentucky. 2 weeks ago, how many of you saw that Volvo, now by 2019, in the next 2 years, all of their cars are either going to be hybrid or all electric. Is that going to impact Ford and Toyota? Yes. But it's also going to impact the state. You have 80,000 miles of road. My guess is most of them are funded by gas taxes. If the number of electric vehicles goes up, suddenly gas revenue goes down, and it becomes a transportation issue. As leaders, you need to be thinking about these issues today because they're going to be here sooner rather than later. A month ago, how many of you saw this news? Amazon bought Whole Foods, and the second after that news was announced, Amazon's stock spiked, but Kroger, Safeway, others plummeted. But I know in February of this year, Amazon just opened a new facility, $1.5 billion, 2,700 new jobs. As Amazon continues to grow, might Amazon continue to build out their facilities here in Kentucky? Absolutely. It's really exciting, but you need to be aware of how fast that expansion might take place. You might have missed this in May. A utility down in Arizona, where arguably it is sunnier, is now producing solar power for 3 pennies per kilowatt hour with no government subsidies. I don't know what the price of coal your electricity generated here is, but is it in the 3 cents per kilowatt hour? My guess is it's not. My point is solar energy without subsidies is in fact getting better. And we need to be aware of how some of these renewable energies are going to continue to transform our economy. In April, you might have missed this news. Here's what they're building over in Germany. It is an all-electric vehicle. It's already here today. Kentucky is number 2 in aerospace to the state of Washington. If you could get out in front of an advance like this, does that allow Kentucky the opportunity to become number 1 and surpass Washington? Absolutely. And I don't want to say for certain that that's going to be a technology that takes off, but you do need to be aware of it. Maybe you could start reaching out to those individuals over in Germany and say, look, if you're looking for somewhere to build it, come to Kentucky. And then in March of this year, how many of you saw this news that Tesla, which didn't even exist 10 years ago, has the same market cap of Ford and General Motors. Now, a lot of people might say that doesn't make any sense. They only produce 1% of the cars. That stock is going to plummet, and you might be right. But here's what people don't understand about Tesla. It's not just an automobile company. It is an energy company, it's a solar company, it's a battery company, and now it's even an insurance company. They're baking artificial intelligence into their cars. They're saying they're going to be so safe in the next 2 years that you're not going to have to buy automobile insurance because the car itself is going to make you safe. So now suddenly they're an insurance company as well. My point is the world is changing right before our very eyes, and we need to be aware of it. Now, the next thing I want to do in this presentation, I want to help you think a little bit like a futurist. And to do this, I always like this question. Who can tell me the mathematical relationship between these numbers? 1,000, million, billion, trillion, quadrillion? There's some mathematical relationship. Anyone know? Yeah, each one is 1,000 times larger than the next. The reason I tell you this is I need you to understand exponential growth. If something doubles, a technology doubles 10 times in the coming decade, it's not going to be 10 times as big through the power of exponential growth. It's going to be 1,000 times. We go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to 64, 128, 256, 512, 1,024. So if a technology doubles 10 times, we're going to see 1,000-fold increase. Certain technologies, we're going to go from the thousands to the millions, others from the millions to the billions. But each one is a quantitative leap ahead. Now, undoubtedly, some of you are saying, we're not going to see any 1,000-fold increase. You know what? Before I even talk to you about the future, let's just step back 19 years. I want to see how many of you can recognize this sound from 1998. How many of you can vaguely place that sound? Some of you can. Those of you who cannot, it's a 56K modem. All technologists have achieved in the last 19 years is a 1,400-fold improvement in bandwidth capacity. And we've gone from fixed landlines to today's mobile wireless world. You're all navigating that 1,000-fold increase relatively easily, and it should open your mind to the possibility that you're going to continue to live through some 1,000-fold increases. But this whole idea of mobility and bandwidth, this is trend number 1 that you need to be aware of, because we're just at the beginning of this revolution. We already have, especially in urban areas, we have 4G speeds. And so here's what this means. Down in St. Louis, this is North America's first virtual hospital. It's a real physical hospital, but by 2020, in the next 3 years, they hope to deliver telemedicine to 3 million people in parts of rural Missouri, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Kansas. The opportunity for the hospitals here in Louisville or Lexington to begin delivering telemedicine to people out in rural parts of Kentucky is a real possibility. And because this is not going to slow down. By 2020, and just in the next 3 years, we're going to go from 4G to 5G. And doesn't that sound like a nice incremental increase? Oh, we're just going from 4G to 5G. 5G is 100-fold more powerful. And this is going to transform the world in some powerful ways. Now, undoubtedly, some of you from rural parts of the state are saying, well, 4 and 5G, that's great for Louisville and other big cities, but broadband is awful in our parts of the state. And it is today, but it doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. Here's what AT&T is now partnering with a local rural cooperative down in Georgia. In big cities or rural towns, if I was part of Kentucky Wired, I'd be reaching out to AT&T and say, look, let's start a pilot program in some of our rural communities in Kentucky, and let's see if it works. Let's help them get the broadband that they need for the future of education, the future of healthcare, the future of their communities. Now, the second trend I need you to be aware of, we're going to potentially see 1,000-fold increase. This is wearable technology. How many of you already wear a Fitbit? Could I just see a show of hands? So it looks like about 10, 15% of you. So this is a wearable technology. It tracks your physical activity. You might use it to monitor your sleep, but it's only 3 years old. Has it ever occurred to you, what might the Fitbit 2.0 of the near future look like? Well, here's one idea. So personally, I don't know if that's cool, creepy, or a coming sign of the apocalypse, but here's the transition we're living through, and I don't think most people really appreciate it. The internet's only 8,000 days old, and when it was first developed, how did we access it? Through our desktop computers. Now we're accessing it through our smartphones. In the not too distant future, the internet and its information is going to come directly to us. It's going to be as though we are living in the internet. And this is a little hard to comprehend, but we see the early signs of it. I look around the room, and my guess is not too many of you are Pokemon Go players, but last year Pokemon Go popped up on the scene, and within the first week there were already more people playing this game than were on Twitter and Netflix combined. It was remarkable exponential growth. But you're thinking, well, Pokemon Go, that's just a silly game. What does that have to do with the future of Kentucky? Here's what it has to do with the future of Kentucky. Pokemon Go is the first widespread use of trend number 3, and that's augmented reality. The idea that we're going to start layering digital information on top of the physical world. Today, we're just using it to capture little Pokemon Go, but let me show you what's going to happen to the future of manufacturing here in Kentucky in a world of augmented reality. So that's pretty cool, but that 3D printer in that video just 5 years ago cost $10,000, and it only printed cheap plastic objects. Today, that 3D printer is available for $199, and 3D printers are now printing things with 160 different materials. And Kentucky is actually a leader in this field. The University of Louisville 3 years ago was the first university ever to 3D print not a beating human heart, but a replica of a heart patient's heart. And so what that allowed the doctors to do is to practice on their exact heart before they actually went in and performed on the real thing. And because they were able to do that practice, they were able to perform the surgery 20% faster, saving the hospital thousands of dollars. And the patient was actually significantly safer. There were fewer post-op complications. But it's not stopping there. How many of you have heard of the Kentucky company called Advanced Solutions Incorporated? A few of you have. They are now 3D printing with a BioInc liver tissue. But they've said within the next 5 to 10 years, they might be able to print skin, and then bones, and then kidneys, and then lungs, and then real human hearts. This is not science fiction. This is science fact, and Kentucky is a leader. But my point is this trend is going to grow exponentially more powerful. But let me tell you how this trend is going to affect some of your other industries. General Electric has said they're going to be printing aircraft engine parts within the next 3 years. What 3D printing means to the future of the aerospace industry is profound. And I know that they're already thinking about it today, but they might need some help from the state of Kentucky. Your neighboring state, Tennessee, now Oak Ridge, is actually 3D printed all of the exterior components of an automobile. So even the automobile industry is going to be transformed by 3D printing. We need to be aware of these trends because they're going to transform big industries sooner rather than later. The fifth trend I need you to be aware of is advances in nanotechnology. I'm not really going to get into any technical details here, but here's what you need to understand. Nano-enhanced materials 5 years ago were a $100 million a year industry, so peanuts in the global economy. In 5 years' time, it's going to be a $100 billion a year industry. From 100 million to 100 billion, that's a 1,000-fold increase. And let me just give you one nanomaterial that could revolutionize the world. This is called graphene. It's an absolutely amazing material, and here's just one thing it might allow us to do within the next 2 years. Because of graphene, you might be able to charge up an electric vehicle not in 4 hours, but in less than a minute, faster than you can refuel your existing automobile. It might not matter that gasoline stays at $2.20 a gallon if this technology takes off, but if it does take off, suddenly the number of electric vehicles increases even more. And then if you're a corn farmer here in Kentucky and you're supplying some of your corn to ethanol, and suddenly that market decreases, You might not think that you needed to know about nanotechnology, but it's going to be impacting everything from farmers to the automotive industry. We need to be aware of these trends. This future is coming perhaps faster than we expect. And what is the most common job in North America? It's truck drivers. And I don't want to say for certain that all trucks are going to be self-driven in 10 years, but if they do take off, how do we retrain those workers? These are the types of things as leaders, we might want to dismiss them, but based on my understanding of technology and how fast these advances are coming, we at least have to take it seriously and we have to start thinking about it sooner rather than later. The seventh trend I need you to be aware of, another 1,000-fold increase. This is the Internet of Things. This is the idea that we're going to start putting tiny computer chips onto physical objects and connect those physical objects to the Internet. People are saying this is anywhere from a $7 to $15 trillion business opportunity. This is a little nebulous, so here's how I want you to understand the Internet of Things. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you might remember 8 years ago we had the tragic bridge collapse. We rebuilt the bridge in record time, but when we rebuilt it, we embedded it with 400 different sensors, and those sensors tell us traffic flow, stress, vibration, temperature, all sorts of different things. So it's a super smart bridge connected to the Internet. So that might beg the question, well, if that's a super smart bridge, what's a super dumb bridge? Well, here's a super dumb bridge, and we have hundreds of thousands of them all across the infrastructure of North America. But that's a lighthearted example, but my guess is if you were in Atlanta 3 or 4 months ago when that bridge caught on fire, you would have wished that that bridge was smart. And in my research, I came across that Kentucky has 14,000 bridges, 3,000 of which are structurally deficient. And that definition of structurally deficient is pretty nebulous, but we need to think about upgrading our infrastructure sooner rather than later. And I think the states that do that, particularly those that are focused on transportation and logistics, are going to have a competitive advantage. But let me just show you some of the other things that we're connecting to the Internet. I know that cattle is another big industry here in Kentucky. We're now connecting cows to the Internet. And by virtue of doing this, the farmers who are doing it, they're increasing their milk production. They also know exactly when to inseminate those cattle. So by virtue of connecting their cattle and their animals to the Internet, they're gaining a competitive advantage. Virtually every industry is going to start figuring out how to connect physical objects to the Internet. The next trend I need you to be aware of, another 1,000-fold increase. This is gene sequencing technology. Here's how I want you to think about this technology. So 10 years ago, this fellow said, hey, I want to sequence my genome, I want to understand my health a little bit better. And that's exactly what he did 10 years ago. But 10 years ago, it cost him $100 million to sequence his genome. He was a billionaire, so he could afford it. But gene sequencing technology is getting better every 4 months. So the corollary is the price is cut in half every 4 months. And if you cut $100 million in half starting in July of 2007, something remarkable happens. By July of 2015, the price had already dropped to $10,000. By July of last year, it had dropped to $1,000. This July, $99. But hold on to your hats, folks. In the next 5 years, in 5 years, it's going to be more expensive for you to flush your toilet than it is to sequence your genes. Isn't that remarkable? What cost $100 million 10 years ago is going to be pennies in the future. And this is going to profoundly transform healthcare and the pharmaceutical industry. But what else might it mean? Well, we might be headed toward a future where life expectancies are significantly longer than our actuarial scientists are projecting today. And I don't mean to suggest that we'll all be living to 120, but what happens if we start living to 90 and 100? All of you who are involved in the pension systems, this is a really big issue, and we need to take it seriously. Because it's not just advances in genomics, it's going to be advances in biotechnology, nanotechnology, regenerative medicine. The possibility that we might be living a lot longer is real, and every leader in both the public and the private sector needs to be taking this seriously. And individually, if you're not prepared, if you're already 50, you should be prepared at least to live to 90, potentially 95. And so you need to start thinking about your retirement in a fundamentally different way as well. The next trend, yet another 1,000-fold increase. This is computer processing power and artificial intelligence. Here's how I want you to think about this. How many of you remember 4 years ago when IBM put its supercomputer on the game show Jeopardy? Any of you remember that? It crushed the human champion Ken Jennings. Well, in the last 4 years, all Watson has done is gotten 1,000 times more powerful. And it's gone from a game show to real-life applications. Let me just show you how some hospitals, or first, how many of you already have Amazon's Alexa in your house? Okay, so it looks like about 5–10% of you. So you already have an artificial intelligence platform in your house. And when it came out 18 months ago, it could do 100 different things. Today, because it's getting exponentially smarter, it can now do 12,000 different things.